Something is happening right now, and it is happening all at once. Across the United States, the sky, the land, and the water are all changing at the same time. And the real question is no longer whether each event can be explained, but why they are all happening together. When you step back and look at the full picture, what stands out is not a single disaster, but a pattern. These events are not isolated. They are overlapping. They are accelerating. And for many people watching closely, they are beginning to feel like a message rather than a coincidence. The sequence begins above us, in the sky, where some of the most unusual observations have been reported. In multiple regions across the United States, people have described nights that never fully became dark. For nearly 72 hours in certain areas, the sky carried a persistent glow that made it difficult to distinguish between night and day. This was not a brief atmospheric effect. It lingered. It remained. It created a sense of disruption in the natural rhythm that people rely on without even thinking about it. Alongside this unusual light, there have been repeated reports of sounds that resemble distant trumpets echoing across the sky. These sounds are not constant, but they are distinct enough to be recorded, shared, and debated. They often occur in the early hours of the morning, when everything else is quiet, making them even more noticeable. Some describe them as metallic. Others say they sound like something ancient, something that does not fit into any familiar category of natural noise. At the same time, visual anomalies have been appearing in cloud formations. People have captured images of shapes that look structured, almost intentional, rather than random. There have also been moments where multiple bright points of light appear in the sky simultaneously, creating the illusion of more than one sun. Scientifically, this can be explained as a parhelion effect, where light refracts through ice crystals in the atmosphere. That explanation is valid. It is grounded in physics, but it does not address why these phenomena seem to cluster together in time. Each of these events has an explanation on its own. Light pollution combined with atmospheric particles can create persistent brightness. Acoustic phenomena in the upper atmosphere can produce unusual sounds. Ice crystals can bend light and create optical illusions. None of this is outside the scope of science. But the issue is not whether science can explain them individually. The issue is why so many of these phenomena are appearing together, within the same narrow window of time, across different locations. When people experience these events one by one, they tend to accept the explanation and move on. But when they begin to overlap, something changes. The sense of normalcy begins to weaken. The mind starts to connect patterns. The question shifts from how to why. This is exactly where Scripture becomes relevant. In Luke 21:11, it says that there will be great signs from heaven. It does not describe a single event. It describes multiple signs. It implies repetition. It implies visibility. It implies that these signs will be noticeable enough to draw attention, not hidden or subtle. What is important here is not forcing every event into a spiritual interpretation, but recognizing the structure of what is being described. The Bible does not focus on isolated incidents. It focuses on convergence. It points to a time when different types of signs begin to appear together, creating a pattern that is difficult to ignore, and that is what makes the current moment different. People are not just curious. They are unsettled. The reaction is not simple fascination. It is uncomfortable. It is the feeling that something larger is unfolding, even if it cannot yet be fully defined. As the sky continues to display these unusual patterns, the focus shifts downward to the water, where another set of events begins to unfold. In Florida, coastal regions have experienced sudden and abnormal surges of seawater pushing inland. While coastal flooding is not new, the speed and intensity of these events have raised concern. water has moved further and faster than expected, reaching areas that are not typically affected under normal conditions. Streets have flooded without warning. Infrastructure has been tested in ways that local systems were not fully prepared for. At nearly the same time, in parts of the southwestern United States, a far more visually disturbing phenomenon was reported. A river changed color almost overnight, turning into a deep red shade that immediately drew attention. The water did not just appear discolored. It appeared dense, unnatural, and accompanied by a strong metallic odor. Fish were found dead along the banks. Birds avoided the area. Residents described the scene as something they had never witnessed before. Environmental experts quickly moved to explain the cause. The most likely explanation involves a combination of industrial runoff and a bloom of red algae, accelerated by unusual temperature and water flow conditions. This explanation is scientifically sound. Red algae can produce toxins. Industrial waste can alter water chemistry. Under the right conditions, these factors can combine to create dramatic visual changes. But again, the question is not whether there is a scientific explanation. The question is why this event is happening at the same time as so many others. Why does it align with the disturbances in the sky, the instability in weather patterns, and the growing number of environmental anomalies? Timing changes perception. When events occur in isolation, they are processed as local incidents. When they occur together, they begin to feel connected. Even if the causes are different, the experience becomes unified. This is where the biblical reference becomes difficult to ignore for those familiar with Scripture. In Exodus chapter 7, water turning into blood is presented as a sign of judgment, a visible transformation that signals a shift in what is happening beneath the surface. Whether one interprets the modern event symbolically or literally is not the point. The parallel exists, and it adds weight to how the event is perceived. What makes this even more significant is the response it generates. People are not simply analyzing these events. They are reacting emotionally. There is a sense of unease that goes beyond curiosity. It is the feeling that normal explanations, while technically correct, are not sufficient to explain the overall picture. Water, like the sky, is not acting in isolation. It is part of a larger pattern. It reflects the same structure that is beginning to appear across different elements of the natural world. And when both the sky and the water begin to show signs of disruption at the same time, the sense of convergence becomes stronger. At this point, the pattern is no longer subtle. It is visible. It is developing. And it is forcing a question that many people would prefer to avoid. If all of these signs are happening together, what does that actually mean? As the disturbances in the sky and water begin to overlap, the situation intensifies further when fire enters the sequence. And this is where the pattern becomes more difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Across multiple regions, large-scale fires began to erupt with a speed and intensity that exceeded expectations. These were not slow-moving seasonal wildfires that could be tracked and managed over time. In many cases, flames spread rapidly through residential zones, crossing barriers that were previously considered reliable lines of defense. Entire neighborhoods were consumed within hours, leaving little time for evacuation and even less time for containment. What made these fires particularly alarming was not only their scale, but their behavior. Firefighters reported that the direction of the flames shifted unpredictably, sometimes reversing course or accelerating without clear warning. The heat levels rose faster than projected models, making standard response strategies less effective. Equipment that had worked in previous seasons struggled to keep up with the changing conditions. Even experienced crews found themselves adapting in real time, responding to a situation that no longer followed familiar patterns. From a scientific standpoint, there are explanations. Prolonged dry conditions create highly flammable environments. Strong winds can carry embers over long distances, igniting new fires beyond containment lines. Rising global temperatures contribute to longer fire seasons and more intense burn cycles. These factors are real and measurable. But once again, the core issue is not whether fire can be explained. The issue is how it fits into the larger sequence that is unfolding at the same time across different elements of the natural world. When fire begins to move into populated areas with increasing frequency, the psychological impact changes. It is no longer seen as a distant environmental issue. It becomes immediate. It becomes personal. It forces people to confront the reality that systems they relied on for safety are no longer as dependable as they once believed. The sense of control begins to weaken, replaced by uncertainty. In Scripture, fire carries a dual meaning. It represents destruction, but it also represents testing and purification. In Joel chapter 2, fire is described as moving ahead and behind, leaving nothing untouched. The imagery is direct. It does not present fire as random. It presents it as purposeful, as part of a process that transforms everything it reaches. Whether one interprets this symbolically or literally, the parallel is difficult to ignore when fire begins to behave in ways that exceed normal expectations. As these fires continue to spread and challenge existing systems, another extreme emerges at the same time, but in the opposite direction. While one region faces intense heat and destruction, another is pushed into deep cold and immobilization. A massive winter system, identified as Storm Fern, moved across the northern and central United States, affecting more than 180 million people, according to meteorological alerts. The scale alone is significant, but the impact is what turned it into a defining event. Snowfall exceeded long-term averages, accumulating to levels that infrastructure was not designed to handle. Roads became impassable. Airports shut down or delayed thousands of flights. Power outages spread across the multiple states, leaving communities without heat and dangerously low temperatures. In cities like New York, the Hudson River experienced partial freezing, something that does not occur frequently under normal conditions. Roofs collapsed under the weight of accumulated snow. Emergency services were stretched thin, responding not only to accidents, but to exposure risks as temperatures dropped further. The cold was not just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Meteorologists pointed to shifts in atmospheric circulation, particularly disruptions in the jet stream that allowed Arctic air to move further south than usual. This explanation aligns with current climate models. However, what unsettled many observers was not just the existence of a severe winter event, but the repetition and persistence of these cold waves. Instead of a single system passing through and allowing recovery, multiple waves followed one another, reducing the time available for systems and communities to stabilize. This created a situation where the strain was cumulative. Infrastructure weakened over time. Resources were depleted. People experienced fatigue, both physically and mentally. The environment did not return to balance before being disrupted again. In the biblical context, weather is not portrayed as random. In Job 37:6, it states that God commands the snow to fall upon the earth. This emphasizes control, not chaos. It presents weather as something that operates under authority, not merely as a collection of independent variables. When weather patterns begin to move beyond familiar boundaries, it challenges the assumption that human systems can fully predict or manage them. What becomes clear at this stage is that the pattern is no longer limited to one type of event. Fire and ice are occurring within the same time frame, affecting different regions but contributing to the same overall sense of instability. One element brings heat and destruction, while another brings cold and paralysis. Together, they represent extremes that stretch the limits of what people consider normal. This contrast is important because it highlights the breadth of the changes taking place. It is not a single category of disruption. It is a multi-layered shift that touches every part of the environment. The sky shows signs that draw attention upward. The water changes in ways that affect life directly. Fire disrupts communities and challenges safety systems. Cold halts movement and tests endurance. As the pattern continues to develop across the sky, the water, and the extremes of fire and cold, another layer begins to emerge beneath everything else. And this layer is more subtle, but in many ways more unsettling, because it comes from the ground itself. Reports of small but repeated earthquakes have begun to surface across multiple regions, including areas that are not typically known for consistent seismic activity. These are not large, catastrophic earthquakes that dominate headlines. Instead, they are smaller tremors that occur again and again, sometimes barely noticeable individually, but increasingly difficult to ignore because of their frequency and persistence. What makes these events significant is not their immediate destructive power, but the pattern they create over time. When the ground shakes once, it is often dismissed as an isolated occurrence. When it happens repeatedly, especially in locations where it is not expected, it begins to change how people perceive stability. The sense that the ground beneath one's feet is solid and dependable is one of the most basic assumptions in daily life. When that assumption is disrupted, even slightly, it creates a deeper level of unease than more visible events. Residents in affected areas have described a strange and difficult to define sensation. It is not always a sharp jolt. In many cases, it feels like a subtle movement, a shifting that comes and goes, almost like a slow pulse. Some have described it as if the ground itself is breathing, expanding and contracting in a way that does not align with anything they have experienced before. This description may sound subjective, but it reflects a shared perception that has appeared across different locations, suggesting that the experience is not entirely isolated. From a scientific perspective, there are explanations that can account for these tremors. Changes in temperature can cause expansion and contraction in the Earth's crust. The accumulation of heavy snow can increase pressure on certain geological structures, potentially triggering minor seismic activity. Variations in underground water levels can also influence stress distribution beneath the surface. These factors provide a framework for understanding how small earthquakes can occur outside of major fault zones. However, even within the scientific community, there is acknowledgement that the frequency of these events is notable. While each individual tremor may fall within expected parameters, the repetition introduces a different dimension. It raises questions about whether underlying conditions are shifting in ways that are not yet fully understood. The explanation exists, but it does not fully address the pattern. What begins to emerge is a continuation of the same structure that has already appeared in other areas. Individual explanations remain valid, but the convergence remains unresolved. The ground is not acting independently from the sky, the water, the fire, or the cold. It is becoming part of the same sequence, adding another layer to the overall picture. This is where the biblical reference becomes directly relevant. In Matthew 24:7, earthquakes are described as occurring in various places as part of what is called the beginning of birth pains. The wording is important because it does not describe a single event or a single location. It describes a pattern that spreads across different regions, increasing in frequency and intensity over time. The comparison to birth pains suggests a process that builds, not something that happens all at once. When this description is placed alongside current observations, the parallel becomes clear in structure rather than in exact detail. The idea is not that every tremor must be interpreted as a direct fulfillment, but that the pattern aligns with what has been described. Small events begin to occur more frequently. They create a sense of instability, They signal that something is shifting beneath the surface. The psychological impact of this cannot be overlooked. Physical damage from small earthquakes may be limited, but the effect on perception is significant. People begin to question the reliability of their environment. Confidence in stability is replaced by awareness of fragility. This shift in mindset can influence how other events are interpreted, reinforcing the sense that multiple systems are changing at the same time. At this stage, the pattern is no longer confined to visible extremes. It extends beneath the surface, affecting the very foundation on which everything else rests. The sky has shown signs that draw attention upward. The water has demonstrated changes that affect life directly. Fire has challenged safety and control. The cold has tested endurance and resilience. Now the ground itself is beginning to move, even if only slightly, completing a cycle that touches every layer of the natural world. What makes this progression significant is the way each element builds on the previous one. None of these events stand alone. Each one adds context to the others, creating a sequence that becomes increasingly difficult to separate into independent parts. The explanations remain, but the connections grow stronger. As the ground continues to shift in small but repeated ways, the central question becomes more defined. If the foundation itself is no longer entirely stable, then what does that mean for everything built upon it? And if this instability is occurring alongside multiple other disruptions, then the pattern is no longer theoretical, it is observable. This is the point where the distinction between isolated events and a unified process becomes unavoidable. The evidence is not based on a single dramatic moment. It is based on accumulation. It is based on repetition. It is based on convergence across different systems that normally operate independently. As the sequence continues to unfold across the sky, the water, the fire, the cold, and even beneath the ground, another layer begins to emerge. And this layer does not come from what is newly created, but from what has been hidden for a long time. At the same time that these environmental changes are taking place, unusual discoveries are being reported in different locations. Objects buried deep beneath the earth are being uncovered. Ancient traces, once sealed under layers of soil and sediment, are being exposed as water recedes and land shifts. In some cases, metallic objects have been found far below the surface, in places where no known modern activity would explain their presence. These objects appear aged, worn by time, and disconnected from any clearly identified historical context. In other instances, markings and structures have been revealed after floodwaters withdrew, suggesting that entire layers of the past have been concealed until now. These discoveries are not necessarily widespread in terms of scale, but their timing is what draws attention. They are appearing during the same period in which multiple natural systems are showing signs of disruption. Science offers explanations that are reasonable and consistent with known processes. Erosion can expose what has been buried. Shifts in water levels can reveal objects that were previously hidden beneath riverbeds or lake floors. Geological movement can bring deeper layers closer to the surface. None of this is outside the framework of natural explanation. However, once again, the pattern introduces a question that goes beyond the individual event. Why are these discoveries happening now, at the same time that other unusual events are taking place across different environments? When considered on their own, these findings are categorized as archaeological or geological occurrences. They are documented, studied, and placed into existing timelines. But when they are viewed as part of a larger sequence, their meaning begins to expand. They are no longer just discoveries. They become signals that something buried is being brought into view. This idea aligns directly with a recurring theme found throughout Scripture, which states that what is hidden will eventually be revealed. This is not presented as a random occurrence, but as part of a process that unfolds when a specific time arrives. The concept is consistent. Things that have been covered, forgotten, or intentionally concealed do not remain that way indefinitely. At a certain point, they are brought into the open. When this concept is placed alongside current observations, it creates a connection that is difficult to dismiss. The environment is not only changing in visible ways, it is also uncovering what was previously out of sight. This adds another dimension to the pattern that has already been established. It is no longer just about what is happening now. It is also about what is being revealed from the past. This shift has a psychological effect as well. Discovering something new is one thing. Discovering something old that was hidden is different. It creates a sense that there are layers to reality that are only now becoming visible. It challenges the assumption that everything important is already known or understood. It suggests that the present moment is not only about change, but about exposure. As this layer is added to the sequence, the pattern becomes more complete. The sky shows signs that draw attention upward. The water changes in ways that affect life directly. Fire disrupts and tests the limits of control. Cold immobilizes and strains systems. The ground itself shifts, introducing instability at the foundation. And now, what was hidden begins to surface, adding a historical dimension to the unfolding events. At this point, the accumulation of these layers leads directly into a broader realization. The significance no longer lies in any single event. It lies in the convergence of all of them. What defines this moment is not one disaster, one anomaly, or one discovery. It is the fact that multiple categories of events are occurring at the same time, across different regions, affecting different systems, yet forming a pattern that connects them. Snowstorms, wildfires, changes in water, repeated seismic activity, atmospheric phenomena, and the uncovering of hidden objects are all taking place within the same general time frame. This overlap is what transforms perception. Science remains capable of explaining each element individually. Meteorology explains storms. Environmental science explains water changes. Geology explains earthquakes. Physics explains atmospheric light and sound. Archaeology explains the uncovering of buried objects. Each explanation is valid within its own field. However, what science does not fully address is why these events are aligning in time and intensity in the way that they are. The issue is not a lack of explanation. It is a lack of integration. Each field operates independently, analyzing its own data and producing its own conclusions. But the overall pattern requires a different perspective. It requires looking at how these events interact, how they overlap, and how they build on one another. This is where the concept of convergence becomes central. When multiple independent systems begin to show signs of disruption at the same time, the probability of coincidence becomes less convincing. The pattern begins to suggest coordination, not in the sense of a single cause, but in the sense of a unified process unfolding across different layers of reality. This perspective is consistent with what is described in Luke 21:25-28, where signs are said to appear in the sun, the moon, and the stars, while distress occurs on the earth and the sea. The description is comprehensive. It does not isolate one category. It includes multiple domains, all experiencing change at the same time. The key element is not the individual sign, but the combination. When these descriptions are placed alongside current observations, the parallel becomes structural rather than literal. It is not about matching every detail exactly. It is about recognizing the pattern of convergence. Signs appear in the sky. Disturbances occur in the sea. Instability spreads across the land. And all of it happens within the same period. This changes how the events are interpreted. They are no longer seen as unrelated incidents that happen to occur close together. They are seen as parts of a larger sequence. The focus shifts from individual causes to collective meaning. At this stage, the question becomes unavoidable. If all of these signs are appearing together, if they are increasing in frequency, and if they align with a pattern that has been described long before they occurred, then what does that indicate about the time we are living in? The convergence does not force a conclusion, but it does demand attention. It removes the ability to dismiss each event without considering the others. It brings everything into a single frame, where the connections become visible. As all of these layers come together, a clearer message begins to take shape, and it is not hidden. When the sky changes, when the water reacts, when fire spreads beyond control, when cold shuts down entire regions, when the ground itself begins to move, and when what was buried starts to surface, the common thread is not chaos alone. The common thread is instability. Systems that were once considered reliable are now being tested at every level. Infrastructure is strained, natural patterns are disrupted. Even the sense of personal safety, something most people rarely question, begins to feel uncertain. This is what defines the moment more than any single event. It is not just that things are happening. It is that what was once stable is no longer guaranteed to remain that way. The systems people depend on every day, whether physical or psychological, are being challenged in ways that force attention. Electricity fails under pressure. Transportation slows or stops. Environmental balance shifts. Communities that once felt secure begin to recognize how quickly conditions can change. At this point, the meaning of these events becomes more important than the events themselves. Scripture does not present signs like these for the purpose of creating fear. The intention is not to overwhelm people or to push them into panic. The intention is to awaken awareness and to prepare. This distinction is critical because it determines how a person responds. Fear leads to paralysis. It causes hesitation, confusion, and inaction. A warning, on the other hand, creates clarity. It gives direction. It provides the opportunity to respond before a situation reaches its final stage. This is why the concept of warning carries weight. A warning means there is still time. It means the outcome is not yet fixed. It means the door is still open for change. If these events were only meant to produce fear, there would be no purpose beyond reaction. But if they are warnings, then they serve a function. They invite reflection. They create a moment where decisions can be made with awareness instead of ignorance. The difference between these two responses can be seen in how people interpret what is happening around them. Some look at the events and feel overwhelmed. They focus on the scale and intensity and conclude that there is nothing they can do. Others recognize that the events, while serious, are also signals. They shift their focus from the events themselves to what those events are pointing toward. This second response does not remove concern, but it replaces confusion with purpose. At this stage, the message becomes personal. It is no longer about observing events from a distance. It is about deciding how to respond to them. The pattern has been established. The convergence has been observed. The question now moves from what is happening to what it means for each individual. When you look at everything that is taking place, the question is no longer whether these events are real. The evidence is visible. The reports are widespread. The experiences are being shared across different regions and communities. The question is how you interpret what you are seeing. Do you view these events as unrelated incidents that happen to occur close together? Or do you recognize a pattern that suggests something more? Do you believe that the timing is coincidental? Or do you see it as a form of warning that carries meaning? These are not abstract questions. They are direct, and they require an honest answer. If these events are simply random, then the response is limited to adaptation. People adjust, rebuild, and continue as before. But if these events are part of a larger pattern, then the response must go deeper. It requires reflection, it requires reevaluation, it requires a willingness to consider that something is being communicated. This is why the present moment matters. It creates an opportunity that does not remain open indefinitely. Right now, there is still time to pause, to think clearly, and to respond with intention. Ignoring what is happening does not remove its significance. It only delays recognition. Take a moment and consider your own position, not in comparison to others, but honestly and personally. If there is even a possibility that these events carry meaning beyond their immediate explanation, then responding to that possibility becomes a reasonable step. It does not require abandoning logic. It requires combining awareness with reflection. If something feels unsettled, if the pattern seems too consistent to dismiss, then it is worth paying attention. Not with panic, but with clarity. Not with fear, but with purpose. Right now, take a moment to stop and think about everything that is unfolding. Step away from distractions. Look at the pattern as a whole. Ask yourself what it could mean and whether you are willing to respond to it. Let us take a moment to pray. Lord, if what we are witnessing is a warning, give us the clarity to recognize it. Help us to see beyond confusion and to understand what is truly happening. Give us humility to reflect honestly and the willingness to change where needed. Protect us in uncertain times and guide us in the right direction before it is too late. If you are still here, take a second to respond. Share your thoughts or even a short prayer in the comments. Not because it is a routine action, but because it reflects a decision to engage rather than ignore. And if this message made you think, share it with someone else.